All right, what's up, guys? It's Analyst, and I'm back again with another episode. And this week we're joined again by Faraz. He missed us for the wide receiver episode, but Rapper came in. He did great, so thank you to Rapper. But Faraz is back, and we're back for tight ends. Last time you were here, we did running backs. Thanks for joining me again, Faraz.
For sure, man. I'm excited to talk tight ends. How's it going?
Going good. I got a haircut since last time you saw
I
me.
love it. I love it. That's the first thing I saw when as soon as I saw you. I'm like, ooh, looking good, man. This quarantine making most people, a little scruffy.
A little scruffy. My beard's still a bit of an issue, but it's all right. So, what we're going to do today is going over tight ends. I'm planning on doing the top 15, but obviously there's some guys that are going to be left out at the end. So if you guys stay tuned for that, you'll see. But I want to address a couple guys that left out there. So we're going to do top 15 and a little extra at the end. It's not going to be my exact order, but we're going to do kind of like grouping. So getting into that, the first two we're going to talk about are Travis Kelce and George Kittle. So jumping straight into it, Travis Kelce, he led all tight ends with 136 targets, 97 catches, and 20 red zone looks. He's 31 years old, which a lot of people don't know that he's actually a little older, but he hasn't really slowed down at all. So there's no reason to expect anything less from what we've seen from Kelce. And Mahomes is healthy, which is big, and he now knows how to read defenses, which I think we talked about with Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Tyreek Hill last year. So
Right.
a lot of positives for Kelce, but is there a world where Kittle does finish as the tight end one?
Yeah, I think so. And when you look at it from a pure talent perspective, and the fact that Kittle is younger too, if he just had more volume,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean, and if he was playing with, Patrick Mahomes, I think we could see, a
It
big
wouldn't
difference.
even be
You
a
know what I mean?
question. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what if Patrick Mahomes was playing with Kelsey, I guess you would say in his prime, maybe a few
Mm-hmm.
years ago. Instead, he had Alex Smith throwing him the ball, and he was still able to get it done. So I think Mahomes is kind of keeping Kelsey up there, in that elite category right now. But he's still playing well. I mean, his yards per route run is up there, and but Kittle also, his yards per route run at the top of the league. So yeah, no, I do think that. Uh, I would not be surprised if Kittle was the top tight end last year. I mean, I think both of them averaged the same amount of fantasy points per game.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I
Yeah, I
should
think it's
have it right.
almost exact.
Yeah, so no, you're exactly on the money. From PPR to half PPR to standard, they had the same points per game,
Are you serious?
15.9. Yeah, 15.9 in PPR, 12.9 in half, 9.8 in standard.
That's
So they were
amazing.
both just across the board the same exact person.
That's legit.
I
But yeah,
didn't even know
so
that.
as far as like Kelsey goes, I mean, when you look at his numbers, like you said, it's not really fallen off, right?
Hmm.
If you look at his finishes from last year, he had the most top two finishes of any tight end, and that was with Mahomes banged up for a portion of the season, right? He was the most consistent of any tight end last year. He finished in the top 10 12 times. So when you
Yep.
look at your season not being that long for your fantasy, I mean, 12 times is pretty damn good, right? Tied to a pass heavy offense, tied to Patrick Mahomes, right? And so, like, when you have Kelsey in your starting lineup, it feels good. When most teams in your league are like scrambling at the tight end position, like every week, like, who am I streaming? Who am I
Yep.
playing? You know what
You
I mean?
got two
And
flip-flop guys.
right, and Kelsey actually has a chance of positively progressing this year. He only caught one of his eight end zone targets, right? So if you're giving Kelsey eight end zone targets, he's not going to only come down with one of them next year, right? So his touchdown number could actually go up. Um, and then he only had five touchdowns all of last regular season, and then in three playoff games he had four, three of
Yep.
them coming in that one game against Houston, right? But yeah, so he led all tight ends in red zone targets, all tight ends in red zone receptions. As far as targets go, he only had less than eight targets in one game during the fantasy season. Like I think it was only one game where he had less than eight. Um, so yeah, I mean the thing with him and George Kittle is that they offer such a high, positional advantage over the average tight end one, and we keep going back to that,
Hmm.
right? So it's not. I don't think it's crazy to draft him in the second round, right? Ideally at the 2-3 turn, right? If he's scoring 40 to 50% more than your average tight end one on a weekly
Yep.
basis. That's going to win you more weeks than some of the wide receivers who might be taken around that same spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm totally on board with that. And it seems like another boring debate. Like we talk about CMC or Saquon Barkley. It's like,
Yeah,
if you can get either of these guys, who cares? Like George
I'm
Kittle,
with you.
he had
Exactly.
very high catch rate. He had the third highest yards after catch among all players, all positions, with 602 yards after catch, which would be more yards than any other, like a lot of other tight ends who just have in general. So,
Is that
and at
Kittle? Is that
26,
Kittle you're talking about
that's
here?
Kittle. Yeah,
Okay.
this is Kittle I'm talking about. So, and he also had a 26% target share.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what you're looking for in a tight end. And I mean, if the 49ers throw the ball any more than they did last year, we could easily, and like you said, they're even in every single category. So, but if it's a matter of getting, let's say, if you Travis Kelsey's there at the end of the second, and then George Kittle, like if you're at that 2-3 turn, like you talked about, um, rather than going for Kelsey at the end of the two, if you want to, like, if they're both available at the turn and you have like the 11th or maybe the 10th, maybe you could wait it out and hope one of two
Right.
fall to you at
Exactly.
the other half, because then it might be even worth it to grab someone who could be gone in that distance. So,
100%. And if you have the 11th pick in a
mhm.
12 PPR, that 12 team isn't going to pick Kittle and
You hope
Kelsey.
not. You hope not.
You hope not. That's a serious advantage right there. But no, no, you hope not. Um,
Yeah,
but
that's a
yeah,
good
no, I
point.
agree, man. Like, I think both of these guys at the 2-3 turns just fine. Kittle led all tight ends in yards per route run as well, right? Led all tight ends in target share. I saw 28%. You saw
Oh,
26%. I saw 28% on airyards.com, but whatever. It's
yeah,
still high
it's
as shit. It's still elite. Um,
percentage.
and then we look at the Debo Samuel injury, right? He's basically
Yep.
the only reliable pass catching target at this moment.
Really.
So it's going to be interesting. We'll see if Debo can make it back okay. But Kittle, like, where else are they going to throw the ball? You know what I mean? Brandon
Yeah.
Ayuk is intriguing, but at the same time, he's going to be a rookie, right?
Absolutely. So those two guys can't go wrong with either of them. But in this next tier here, I want to know from you, from your perspective, who do you have higher, Zach Ertz or Mark Andrews?
Oh, it's interesting, man. I think you have to weigh your options as far as whether you're playing in like a full PPR league or
Mm-hmm.
like a standard league,
Yep.
right? I think if you're in a full PPR league, Zach Ertz might just be, more reliable, maybe have a higher floor. A big percentage of Mark Andrews' production was from touchdowns. He had, I
Yep.
think,
10
10 touchdowns
touchdowns.
last year,
Yep.
right? But among tight ends, he tied for first in end zone targets, right? And touchdowns on end zone targets,
Yep.
right? He was only third behind Kittle. I'm sorry, behind Kelsey and Ertz in red zone targets. Second in red zone receptions. First in red zone touchdowns. Second only to George Kittle in yards per route run. Fourth in target share. Second in weighted opportunity, which is weighted opportunity for tight ends or wide receivers
Mm-hmm.
or anything in the passing game is basically a combination of targets and air yards, right?
And
Um,
all this, right? All this what Mark Andrews we're talking about.
we're talking about
He
Mark
was
Andrews.
averaging 44.6% of the snaps.
That's
So
crazy, man.
he was on the field for less than half the game, and he ranked this high in all those categories. And I know a lot of people saying, Hayden Hurst isn't there, so his snaps can definitely go up, and it's possible. But at
Yeah,
the same time, this is a run-heavy team, and Nick Boyle is the one who played most of the snaps last year, and I don't expect that to change.
right.
So even if and a lot of times when Hayden Hurst was on the field, it was Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews or Hurst and Boyle. So if anything, maybe we'll see Andrews get a small increase in time on the field. But Nick Boyle is still going to be the main guy when they're running the ball. He's their blocking tight end for sure. So,
Right.
um,
Andrews was a little banged up throughout the season,
yeah,
right?
that's
He was
true.
coming off the field a lot. You weren't sure if he was going to play, and then he would like score two touchdowns, right? There was a lot of that this year.
Hmm.
It felt like him and Marquise Brown were both like hobbling off the field all the time, and you weren't sure if they were going to play a full game or not. Um, Now, are you willing to pay a fourth round price tag for him in regular 12 team PPR leagues, one tight end, no premium? Right? Like, who would you rather draft? Andrews in the middle of the fourth or Ertz in the middle of the fifth? I think that's where they're going right now
Yeah.
in full PPR.
So for me, I mean, Ertz. He's only 29 years old. A lot of people talking about him getting older, and then you point out the fact that Kelsey's 31.
Right.
So,
I think
not
a
too
lot
much.
of people do that is because like, oh, Dallas Goddard's there and he's the
Yeah.
incumbent, and like it's like they're treating it like a Kyle Rudolph, Irv Smith situation
Mhm.
where I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, and the Eagles were actually getting into contract talks with Zach Ertz too. They're talking about a possible extension. So it doesn't seem like they're ready to move on from Ertz and go into solo Goddard either. And actually, between the weeks 9 to 16, Zach Ertz was the tight end too. So he had a lot of second half production, right? And he was second in targets. And when you look at who they added this offseason, right? That's another argument I hear, the fact that they added all these guys. But none of these guys are short to intermediate guys. They're all deep guys. I mean, Jalen Reagor, definition of a deep threat. Deshaun Jackson, okay, that's a real definition of a deep threat. If he's still on the team, who knows what's happening? Um, and they're not going to get into that. We don't want to be political on this one. But and then you got Marquise Goodwin, who I mean, Olympic sprinter. And then on top of that, Alshon Jeffrey, he's out with he has no timetable for return. So if anything, this stretches the field for a guy like Ertz to get middle and to get open in the middle. Him and Goddard are going to be those two guys for the short and intermediate throws. And if Carson Wentz wants to go deep, he'll look for someone else. But I mean, this could really open things up for Ertz, if anything. So I really don't see a reason for Ertz to fall out of that top three elite tier. I wouldn't put him over guys like Kittle or over Kelsey. It's not impossible, but I would put Ertz third over Andrews, and I think taking Ertz at the end of the fifth, if you're talking like pure value wise, in terms of Andrews and like you said, the fourth, or Kittle in the second, or Kelsey in the second, I think it's great value. And in the throne league we have, I just couldn't pass up on him. I think I got him with the 5'11.
Yeah,
So
and that's ridiculous value, man. I mean,
exactly.
his usage did go down a little bit from last year. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, his 2018 was huge, right? And yeah, it was probably due to Dallas Goddard coming through a little bit more, his presence, right? Kind of in the same area where Ertz was getting his volume from. But yeah, no, he came on, like you said, he came on like after week 9, right? So I think he only
Absolutely.
hit double-digit targets once last season until week 9. But then week 9 and on, he averaged more than 10 targets per game. 24%. He ended up still with a 24% target share with his elite, which is elite for a tight end.
Yep.
And then like you mentioned those guys, right? Djax, Alshon Jeffrey, Marquise Goodwin. Like, are those guys going to stay healthy? Like, yeah, they're
Yeah.
two of those three are deep threats, but like, they aren't really the definition of guys who can stay healthy. So, Jalen Reagor, still a rookie, very promising, but still a rookie. So yeah, I mean, I think that he's still going to be the tight end 3 most likely. He has, I think, the safest floor. And when you look at, especially in full PPR leagues, I think he has a pretty good safe like positional advantage over the rest of the tight end ones. Specifically more in PPR leagues. And then you look at the other guys because Ertz hasn't necessarily been like a touchdown guy, right, in his career. So yeah, so the reason why a lot of tight ends are so touchdown dependent, right, that Ertz
Yep.
doesn't have as much of an advantage in standard leagues or non PPR leagues where touchdowns are weighted a little bit more. You know,
Yeah, I think back to I think it was a couple years ago. I was in the fantasy championship in one of my leagues, and the guy I was going against had Ertz, and I had a sizable lead. And in my head, I'm like, "There's no way, like, I'm gonna win." And then it was just those short to intermediate passes, the PPR league, and there was just one for like 2 yards. Like, no, and then he ended up getting. I lost by point 0.2
oh
because
man,
Ertz caught it and then ran like the exact yardage he needed to win, and I always think back to that and how many short to intermediate passes he actually caught that game
right.
that put him over the edge. I mean, he wasn't scoring touchdowns, but he still
Oh,
got
was
the
that the
job done.
game where like was that like a primetime game where he had like 2 catches in the first half and then
I
just
think it
had
was
like
a
12
Monday
in the
night
second?
game. It was a
Right.
Monday night game.
And he
Yeah,
had like 12 in the second half.
exactly. And I
Right.
was thinking, I'm like, he only had two. There's no way
Right.
I'm going to lose this. And then,
Yep. I think same thing happened to me that same week where I was in the lead going into that game and then he just absolutely killed it the second half. So so yeah. So no,
sucks.
so do you know, would you say that there's a decent tier jump after Mark Andrews, like Zach Ertz, Mark Andrews? Or,
So I would
or
say
what do you think that tier jump is?
now
Tier
there's
gap, I
definitely
guess.
a jump, but I will say so. The next guy I have on my list is Evan Ingram. I have him at 5. Now, if If you told me Evan Ingram was playing 16 games, there would not be a tier gap. Evan
Yes,
Ingram, I would put in that top five, questionably three, four, whatever.
100%
Obviously,
agree. And like, there's a possibility that we're talking about him with Kelsey and with Kittle.
exactly. And funny enough, you mentioned that. So Evan Ingram last year, he was on pace for 136 targets, and I think he only played like 8 games.
Right.
And 136 targets is what Travis Kelsey got last year. So that's some pretty good company. And the new offense that he's going to be running with Jason Garrett, right? So that's the offense that kept Jason Witten as a top 10 tight end for years and years and years. And the way he designs his offense is just to have those guys running through the middle, through the slot, get them open by manipulating linebackers and so forth. So, I mean, Evan Ingram, if he can stay on the field, he's in a really good spot and he's going to benefit a lot from being in this offense. I mean, like I said, he led the Giants in targets last year, like
Right.
per
And
game.
if you look at the years where Jason Garrett was calling the plays for the Cowboys,
I think it was like until 2012,
yeah, it was
2013.
for six. It was 6 years. I think it was until 2011. I'm not. I could be wrong,
It could be,
but it
yeah.
was for 6 years, and he didn't let Jason Witten fall out of a top five finish in fantasy for those 6 years. Each of those
Yep.
6 years. So the upside is through the roof if Ingram can stay healthy because from a talent standpoint, he's one of the best. He's probably I don't know. Like, is there a more athletic tight end than him? You know what I mean? Like
Maybe
when he's
David
healthy,
Njoku, but I mean that guy can't stay healthy either.
right? He's raw as hell, right? But
Yeah.
Ingram, he kind of like he's put it together fairly quickly. Um, you know what I mean? So it's going to be interesting. He played 11 games in 2018, 8 games in 2019. Um, at his price, it's not that bad. Like it's a seventh round. But then like Devontae Parker's being taken right before him. You got like guys like James White, Jordan Howard, Michael Gallup, Jarvis Landry, Julian Edelman. But the upside is there, and like if I'm gonna grab him there, like I want to still grab someone like Mike Gesicki, a few
Yep.
rounds later. Like I don't draft two tight ends, but if I'm gonna grab Ingram, I probably want to draft a second tight end just to be safe.
Yeah, and I mean that could totally cover you. And if Ingram does play well, it pays off, and you have that same positional advantage that you would have if you had Kelsey or Kittle, and you're getting him in probably like what 6, 7, 8, somewhere in that range, probably closer to 7 or 8, just because everybody's scared of the injuries, and
Right. Now, do you
they
think
don't.
we're holding our breath to say that he could stay healthy this year, or do you think it's possible? Like,
Yeah, I
like
mean,
when you see Ingram in the seventh round,
mhm.
right? Like, does he pop out at you, or are you just kind of avoiding?
He does. So he still pops out at me. I'm gonna get his player profiler image up here because usually they have pretty good insight on his injuries and uh what I mean. Oh my god, I'm looking at his measurables right now. Let me just. So he's 100th percentile he had a 4.42 40-yard dash.
Insane,
He's 96th percentile in speed, 87 in burst, 91 in agility, and 93rd in catch radius. I mean,
insane.
those are insane metrics. They compared to Gerald Everett. Okay, so let's go down here. So he had a midfoot sprain, a Lisfranc surgery. He missed 6 games with that, but other than that, it's been sprains and strains,
Right.
right? So he had MCL sprain, hamstring, knee, ankle, and none of them are really high risk for re-injury. So it's really about that foot.
It's
He's
really
been
about the foot.
unlucky.
It's really about the list, Frank.
Yeah, I mean he's been pretty unlucky with a lot of sprains and strains, and none of those suggest that he's at more risk to get those strains and sprains again. At
Right.
least that's what it's saying here. So the big concern is the midfoot sprain. So that's the
Okay.
Louis Frank. He had surgery on it, but if he's healthy, I mean, I think Amari Cooper played through that the whole entire year last year,
Right.
among
Yeah,
other
he had
things.
something. He had something similar. I think Amari Cooper wasn't a list, Frank. It was more of a. Uh,
I forget all the foot. We're learning so many foot bones, the Jones and the Louis Frank.
it was
Learning too
yeah.
many
What
foot.
the hell? What the hell is it with that Amari Cooper had? It was more of a
I had him in his last
I
year.
forget, dude. I forget.
Whatever it was.
It's more of a
Point
nagging
being,
thing, but I forgot
no.
what.
Point being, if his foot's okay, he can realistically stay healthy.
Right. Right.
Um, so
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
and he's
I'm warming up to him a little bit. After this conversation, after looking into it right before this podcast, I'm definitely warming up to him a little bit more. He wasn't somebody that I was looking at in the seventh round. I'm like, his upside is worth it. But I think his upside might be worth it, depending on what your team looks like up until then. Um, it can be. So, if you have a pretty solid team and you're feeling good, why not
and
shoot for the moon with Evan Ingram?
you know it's an interesting thing to think about too, right? With COVID going around and players possibly getting getting it and being out for 2+ weeks,
Right.
is it reasonable to downplay or like to put more of an even playing field for those injury prone type guys? Because if you're thinking everybody kind of carries similar injury risk, right? Let's say like you're worried about Evan Ingram getting hurt, but at the same time you're worried about every single player being out for 2+ weeks.
Hmm.
So at the same time, when these players are on the field, right? If everybody carries similar risk, I don't know where I'm going with this, but point
No,
being, like,
I know where you're going. Like
you
you're
get what I'm
basically
saying?
saying that like not everyone's going to play a full season, so why project Ingram or worry about him playing a full season?
Exactly. So, and point being, like, if he's on the field, he's gonna get those points, right? And then if you're talking about like, let's say if someone has Evan Ingram at like 10 just because of injuries, and they have maybe like Mike Gesicki or Hunter Henry above him, and you're like, I don't know if like if you could choose one healthy game for each of them, you're gonna pick Ingram every single time. So
Right.
I don't really understand the point of ranking him that low or prioritizing him at the end if you know like it's gonna be kind of a messy situation, and if he's on the field, he's gonna do better than both those guys. So that's something I just thought about there. So.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
So we're gonna get into this next tier of players: Hayden Hurst, Darren Waller, Hunter Henry. Three guys who I have here, and you could probably include Mike Gesicki in that group. I might leave him for that next group, but as for this tier, we'll look at some of these guys. So Hayden Hurst, obviously, he's going to benefit from that 200 plus vacated targets in Atlanta. All that isn't going to be filled completely by just him, obviously. Some of that's going to go to Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, Todd Gurley, but he's in a good spot. I mean, Dirk Cutter feeds those tight ends, and Hayden Hurst is a first round talent. Uh, he's got a top five upside. If I mean, we saw what happened with Austin Hooper last year and how much he was targeted, and I would think his floor is a lot safer than people think. Like a lot of people are saying, like, oh, I don't know if I could trust him for my offense, but it's a Dirk Cutter offense, and he's got the talent. So I don't
Right.
know. He dealt with a lot of injuries in Baltimore. It was kind of weird but it was noticeable in Ozzie Newsome's last season as the GM. He picks two tight ends back to back. I mean, that's just what you got to do. But they still got some decent trade value for him. I'm a little over Hayden Hurst this year.
Yeah, Hayden Hurst is walking into a great situation. He was a former first round pick who just didn't get the opportunity, right? After
Yep.
the Ravens, they found a gem in Mark Andrews, right? He got traded for a second round pick, so the Ravens did get good value back. So there's real draft capital given up by the Falcons, right? He gets thrown into Dirk Cutter's offense, pass heavy offense, known to feed the tight end. And this is a result of Austin Hooper leaving in free agency, right? And by the way, Austin Hooper was a number one fantasy tight end up until he got hurt in week 10, right? And that's
Yeah.
including the Falcons bye week, by the way. Now, for me, here's the difference between Austin Hooper and Hayden Hurst, right? Hooper was in a great situation, but he was building up to that year. It was a
Yeah.
perfect for me. It was a perfect storm. Dirk Cutter coming in is kind of what propelled Hooper to where he got to last year.
Mhm.
He was going into his fourth year though, after improving every single year, 19 receptions, 49 receptions, 71 receptions, right before his big 2019 season. 3 years with Matt Ryan before his big 2019 season. So while Matt Ryan might be like enamored by Hurst's athletic ability, which he should be, right? It's just not going to make up for the fact that this is his first year with Matt Ryan, and he's going to have to make a ridiculous jump to meet people's expectations. I think
Mhm.
13 receptions his rookie year, 30 receptions last year, and Hurst is being drafted in the seventh round of guys around guys like Evan Ingram, right? Tyler Higbee, Jared Cook is being drafted 2 rounds after him, Mike Gesicki 6 rounds after him, Jonnu Smith 6 rounds after him. So for me, I think his price might be too high. I think that the hype is getting a little bit overblown. Like if Hayden Hurst was going in like the 10th round, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? That's where I'm comfortable. You know what I mean? And I personally like I was all over Austin Hooper last year. You know what I mean? But I liked the progression of him, going into that fourth year, improving every year. Him being like comfortable with his quarterback and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I look at Hayden Hurst now. But his price, honestly, like is it's kind of pushing me away.
Interesting. So I guess what I would say to that is, do we believe Austin Hooper is that good of a talent, right?
No,
So,
I don't.
and that's one of the things we talk about with like a guy like Matt Breida or like Raheem Mostert if he gets traded. Like, are they truly a product of that system? Like, did it did it take Austin Hooper 3 years because he needed to establish that connection with Matt Ryan, or is it just because that's how long it took him to develop? Because if you look at Calvin Ridley in his first year, he had 10 touchdowns. So, and I know it's different positions, but still, it's catching the ball from Matt Ryan. It just doesn't seem like you need all that much time. So, for me, Hayden Hurst as a first round talent, if he shows up, right? I will say, obviously, there's a question of if he shows up. He's had a lot of injuries, and he's a little older than people realize. I think he was drafted at the age of 25, so he's got to be
Yeah, he was.
26,
Yeah,
27. So, and I mean, like, I don't know. I'm on the boat where I don't think Austin Hooper was this generational talent,
no,
and
he's not.
and
He's not. But I
he
mean, he did like he had 500 yards his second year,
mhm.
660 yards his third year, and that was without Dirk Cutter.
Yeah, yeah,
You
he
know,
did absolutely. But and I think another thing about that too was like if you look back to even 2018, what priority target was he behind Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, and Mohamed Sanu, and Devontae Freeman, and I think Levine Toilolo was even there, like splitting some of the snaps with him as well.
right?
And Tevin Coleman even catches out passes out of the backfield. So when you look at Hayden Hurst's situation in Atlanta, he could realistically be Matt Ryan's third target in an offense that's passing more than any other team in the league with 200, vacated targets on the table. He's a first round talent. I think he'll pick it up a little quicker. I do agree. I mean, I wouldn't want to see him go before a guy like Evan Ingram. But at the same time, I believe in him to the point where he can definitely have an Austin Hooper like year with his first year,
Right.
right? Even if it's not all the way up there, I think I have his. I did my projections not too long ago. I think I might have him a little lower than what Austin Hooper did, but I'm still expecting a good year.
It has to be lower than what Austin Hooper did because Austin Hooper was the number one top fantasy tight end before he got hurt.
It's Dirk Cutter.
Right. Well, I mean, listen, Dirk Cutter is the tight end whisperer.
Yeah.
So Hurst isn't going to like. I don't. I think there's a very low possibility that Hurst busts.
Yeah.
Right. It's just that it's for me. It's just about lowering the expectation of
Sure.
what his upside could be this year.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. And I mean, even like next year, we could be talking about him in that same group as
Yes,
Ertz and Evan Ingram and Mark Andrews. It's not impossible. So,
for sure.
so some of the other guys that have in this area here, Darren Waller and Hunter Henry. I'm kind of flip flopping about who I want to rank over the other one. I'm not a huge fan of Darren Waller. I know a lot of people are. A lot of people are expecting because he had a ton of targets last year. It was his first year as a starter. He did very, very well, and I'm not discounting that. But there's just a lot of things had to go right. He had to have a lot of things happen for him to have that kind of opportunity. So I mean, so he let's see, they had a lack of weapons first of all, and with Hunter Renfro active, and this is just Hunter Renfro. Darren Waller dropped from 13.8 points per game to 12.3 points per game, which would be the sixth best tight end to the eighth. And that may not sound like a big jump, but when they're ranking 6 to 8, the sixth best tight end could be going in the sixth, seventh round. The eighth best could be going eighth, ninth. So it may not sound like that much, on top of that, like I said, that's just Renfro. That's just what Renfro did for this and what Renfro took away from Darren Waller. You add in Foster Moreau, who was their rookie tight end last year, who had 5 touchdowns as opposed to Darren Waller's. I think he had like 3, right? So he's going into his second year. They add Witten into that tight end room, who I know at his age, when our expectations are not high at all, but nonetheless, he's a reliable veteran who could take away some catches from him. And then we add Ruggs, we add Brian Edwards, And we add the fact that Darren Waller busted in 37.5% of his games. That's more than a third of the season he had less than 10 points. And I understand second year in the offense, Derek Carr is a pretty accurate quarterback, no matter how unproductive he seems he might be. But just overall, a lot of things had to go right for Darren Waller to do as well as he did. And I really don't think that's going to be the case next year. He's a possession type guy. He's a PPR tight end, and they have a lot of other guys to take away targets from him. I'm not too high on him at all.
Yeah, I think Darren Wall's like a freak athlete, but I think the target share can go down with additions on offense. I think you nailed it. I think that's pretty much what it is. You add Ruggs, Brian Edwards, Hunter Renfro healthy, and then you consider his price, the 5'6" turn.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, no, I'm not into it. I'd rather go elsewhere. I'd rather go elsewhere in positions where you know that they're going to get the targets and you know where they are in the pecking order. You know what I mean? And he might be high on the pecking order, but the target share can decrease a little bit because of the additions.
exactly. And he relied on that heavy target share to do well. He had, I think, like one pretty explosive game, but there was a big span where he didn't score a touchdown and he just did really, really bad. He wasn't even startable for, like I said, like 37% of his games. And his situation only got worse. So Um, that's where I'm at with Darren Waller. I'm not really huge on him, but let's look at where is he over here? Hunter Henry. So Hunter Henry, obviously the QB situation is not favorable. He's had some injuries over the years. He's had concussions, knee strains, and the ACL was kind of the icing on the cake. But he's 2 years removed from that ACL now, and he's recovered from that. I think it was a tibia plateau fracture that he got at the end of last year. So he should be recovered from that by now. And even with Tyrod Taylor there, we saw Tyrod Taylor look for Charles Clay. I think it was like 2016 that he was Charles Clay was a borderline top 10 tight end,
Right,
and
right.
the year didn't look great on paper. But point being, like Tyrod made him a viable fantasy asset, and Hunter Henry's just that much better of an athlete. So um, between Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler, it's a lot for a guy like Tyrod to support. But I think Hunter Henry in the red zone, especially, he can still be that guy. And he can still be that week to week, 10 point per game type guy. And if Justin Herbert comes in and Justin Herbert just does any more, like any better than what Tyrod does, then his value just goes way up. Right?
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think he's probably going to be his go-to guy.
Yep.
Honestly, like, I think his upside is capped a little bit.
Hmm.
Like you said, he might have a solid floor. Especially when we talk about all these other players that we're talking about, right? I think he'll be solid for an eighth round pick. It's not bad, but then like guys like Jared Cook is sitting there a little later. That's a better pick in my opinion, like a round or two later. But yeah, I think Hunter Henry and like Austin Eckler are going to be Tyrod's favorite targets. Even though his favorite target should be Keenan Allen,
Yeah.
I just don't know if Tyrod is good enough to make all of them viable, and for Tyrod Taylor to look outside the numbers like that. I think Tyrod is good enough to like look up the seam. If the seam's not open, dump it down.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean Hunter Henry even he's on a contract year because he got that franchise tag.
Right.
So if he wants that contract, he's gonna have to do his best when he's on the field. So
Good point.
it'll be interesting to see what Henry does. But let's come jump into the next section of guys. So Mike Gesicki, Jared Cook, Tyler Higbee. So I have Tyler Higbee 11th, and we'll talk about that real quick. So that's a little lower than other people. I did have him higher, like really high originally, because obviously recency bias. You look at how he finished the season. In that 5 game span, he averaged 91% of the snaps. He had 21.4 points per game as a tight end, which is
Insane.
nuts. We talked about Travis Kelsey. He finished the year with 15.9. This is 21.4. So obviously he was the tight end one in that span. No question about that. And but the thing is, like with Everett there, his points per game drops to 4.8.
Yeah,
So
and Everett's a good tight end.
yeah, and that in those 5 games we talked about at the end of the year, that was without Everett. That was with Everett being hurt.
Yeah,
Like it's just something
Everett
switched.
Everett only played a total of 4 snaps during that run
Yep.
that Higbee had at the end of the season. So like just count when Higbee started playing well. From that point on, Higbee, I mean, Everett only played on 4 snaps. So that tells you a lot. That's a obvious piece of evidence where you're like, or not evidence, but like obvious piece of data where you're like, okay, maybe I can't like completely buy in on Higbee continuing his run.
Yeah, and I mean there is a world where that could be Higby's role, right? It's not impossible. It's just not very likely. And his splits with and without Everett is a huge red flag when it comes to drafting him. And on top of that, there's I think Sean McVay that asked him about Higby, and he immediately started talking about Gerald Everett.
Yes.
So I don't know if you saw that quote. It was something like Higby's fine, but we want to get Everett more involved.
Yes.
So and no matter what, it's going to be 12 personnel. They want to run a lot of 12 personnel. So there could be room for both of these guys to be fantasy relevant. But point being, I'm just not expecting anything close to what
Yeah.
Higby had at the end of
And
the year.
and the thing is like if both guys are fantasy relevant, then the chances are that you overdrafted Tyler Higbee.
Yep.
So and I'm just not convinced that Higbee's going to get the type of target volume that he had, right? Obviously, I think in Dynasty, he's a hold or a buy, right? Because
Yeah.
he signed an extension early last season before his run, by the way, and this is Everett's last year in his contract. So
Yep.
Everett could be out the door, and Higbee could be the guy, and maybe they go back to 11 personnel. If the guys that they drafted can come through, right, and they go back to that. But he's going to be, I think, with the 12 personnel, like you said, Gerald Everett going to be on the field a lot more. And yeah, and then also, if you notice the teams that Higbee went up against during that
Cardinals.
run,
Was it Cardinals twice?
it was Cardinals twice, Seahawks, Dallas, right? All terrible teams against tight ends.
Yeah.
The only team that was good against tight ends was the 49ers, and he played really well against them, right? So you got to give him credit. So I don't know, it's tough to like give him complete credit for that entire run.
But it's funny, even on the year, the 49ers were good against the tight end. But towards the end of last year, they
They fell
really
off,
started breaking down. I mean,
right?
look at like Drew Brees tore him apart.
Right.
So that was towards the end of the year that 49ers defense was not the same.
Good point.
But yeah, I mean, like it was a perfect storm for Tyler Higbee. It was everything he could have wanted, and he took full advantage, which we should give him credit for, which is why he's 11, which is why he's on the list, right? Like if we didn't think he deserves any credit, he wouldn't be on the list at all.
Yeah,
But point
100%.
being,
And
we can't have our expectations to how he finished the year because it's not viable.
right, and I think with his price tag, I think a lot of people aren't, you know, completely sold on him because he's being taken. His ADP is at the bottom of the seventh right now. Ingram is top of the seventh. So between those two guys, even though Higbee had a ridiculous run, I honestly think that Ingram is still the higher upside guy.
Yeah, for sure. And that's how it's going to end up playing out with their ADPs and where you can take them. So let's see what some of the others got here. So Mike Gesicki, he had 11.7 points per game in the second half of the season. Not bad. He had the seventh most targets on the year. And he's got a lot of room for improvement, right? I mean, the talent has never been in question with him. Ever since his rookie year, I was enamored with his talent and what he did in Penn State and his measurables. Also, I mean, if a lot of people remember seeing, he was the guy where they're like, he could jump higher than OBJ, he could run faster than this guy, or whatever it was. I wish I had the thing in front of me.
it was
But
kind of it was kind of like the David Montgomery thing last year,
yeah,
where they were like, "Oh, he has the quads of Saquon and
yeah.
what I'm saying, the hands of Le'Veon and what I'm saying, all that." It's
Yeah,
hilarious. I think
like he's got a
Gesicki
big
played
wingspan. He could jump really high. Well, I mean, but it's not it's not false. Like he's a great athlete, and when given the opportunity, if he is given more of an opportunity this year, whether it's Ryan Fitzpatrick, Tua later in the year, whatever it ends up being, he could definitely capitalize on that. I mean, Preston Williams is coming off a torn ACL. Devontae Parker was their main guy for most of last year, but it kind of opens things up for a guy like Mike Gesicki to jump in and be that second guy or fight even for those first, to be the main guy on that team. Last year they had to rely on like Patrick Laird. They're like one of their like what was he undrafted running back who they
right.
had. Albert Wilson picked it up a little bit towards the end of the year, But Mike Gesicki was the guy who really started to catch fire. And a lot of times when you see that in the second half of the season, and this kind of contradicts what we talked about with Higbee, but when you see that bump at the end of the year, it kind of gives you the nod for next year. Like with a guy like Adam Thielen, the year the year before he broke out, in the last couple of games, he started doing really, really well. And then a
Yes.
lot of people were hyping him up. And the next year, he had a fantastic year. And I mean, the case could be the same for Higbee. That's why we're talking about him as a top 11 tight end, as opposed to last year, we weren't talking about him at all. So, with a guy like Gesicki, what we saw in the second half of the year was really promising. And like I said, there's a lot of room for improvement. He's a talented player.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Mike Gesicki is the candidate that has a lot of stars aligning, kind of the way Austin Hooper had it last season, right?
Yeah.
And maybe not as perfect, right? But I liked Hooper last year. I think Hooper was my main target last year, right? And this year, Gesicki is my main target, right? And obviously a lot of it has to do with price, right? But Chan Gailey, like when you look at his tight end history, he doesn't have a crazy tight end history like Dirk Cutter. He's not the tight end whisperer, but he does have a good history with tight ends who can man the slot. And Gesicki did that more than any other tight end last year. We saw it with Tony Gonzalez, where he didn't play that much in the slot, like 40% in the slot, and then like all of a sudden when he played with Chan Gailey, it went through the roof. He more than 100%. He doubled his snaps in the slot. Now, Mike Gesicki isn't Tony Gonzalez, but
Mm.
the point is that he can take these guys who are athletic and
Use
can be
him.
and he can be their guy in the slot. He did the same thing with Chan Gailey with Scott Chandler as well. But yeah, so now what do tight ends do when they line up in the slot? Right, they run routes. Right, he lined up in the slot 100 snaps more than the next guy. He was
Well,
fourth among tight ends in receiving yards from the slot behind Mark Andrews, Jared Cook, and Travis Kelce. Second in targets and receptions among tight ends coming out of the slot last year, only behind Mark Andrews. 10 end zone targets last year. End zone targets, not red zone targets, but end zone targets last year. And only Jared Cook and Mark Andrews had more. They had 11, right? So one more.
mm,
Gasecki also fourth among tight ends in total air yards among tight ends. So Fitzpatrick was looking for him on deeper throws.
mm,
So, and like Austin Hooper, he's kind of coming into his own, right? Like I mentioned, that progression. 22 receptions his first year, 51 receptions in his second year. Third year, could be ready for a breakout. So that's something that I
absolutely.
look for in tight ends as well. Coming into that fourth year is kind of when these tight ends usually break out. So with his price, 13th round ADP, like that's who I'm looking at. Like I'm taking Gesicki in every single draft, and I'm okay with him being my tight end one. I'm fine punting that position.
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. That's what I'll be targeting in a lot of my years, and a lot of my leagues. But another
A
guy
lot
who
of my
I target
years from
here,
here on out, I'll be
my
targeting Mike
years.
Gesicki.
Yeah, I'll be looking. He'll be good for a while. I mean, if you can get him in Dynasty, and that's probably the cheapest you'll ever be able to get him.
Right,
He's a
right.
young
Now,
guy too.
let me ask you a question now. Like, are
Sure.
you drafting like I mentioned like punting the tight end position until like the 13th round, for a guy like Mike Gesicki? Like, are you normally drafting tight ends in the middle rounds? Are you looking for them at all? Are you just looking to see if some of them fall, or how do you normally do it?
So the way I go about tight ends is I love doing this thing where um, I'll go after a. So I do this thing where I like to get three tight ends on my roster.
Interesting.
It's so weird, but one of the things I'll like to do, like for this year, I'll like to look for we talk about like Evan Ingram. If I can get Evan Ingram the sixth, seventh round, I'll take it. Then I'll go and I'll grab Mike Gesicki and I'll take that. And then you get to the tail end of your draft, a guy like Jonnu Smith is sitting there, and you're like, maybe I'll take a
Right.
shot with Jonnu. I mean,
Right.
like if you talk about guys later on who can get you 10 plus points per game, you're looking at like Larry Fitzgerald, John Brown. Like there's not too much when you get to that point.
Right.
So I'm looking at a tight end or just a guy in general who can get me those points. I'm going to take him. Like last year, I had a league where I had Darren Waller, I had George Kittle, and I had Mark Andrews.
Right.
I was
That's
able to
serious.
ship off,
That's serious trade stuff right
and
there.
that's what I do, right? So I traded off George Kittle. I went the whole season with Mark Andrews. I had Darren Waller potentially in the slot. I got a top tier wide receiver in return, and I was doing just fine. And then another league was my big money league. I had Evan Ingram, I had Mark Andrews, and I believe it was Darren Waller again. Like I have these same guys. Like I love Andrew, and I pinpointed him in all my leagues. And
Right.
because of that, I was able to trade that first guy for trade the bigger name guy for a better starter, and then I keep that same elite tight end. So if you hit on that second guy, it
Right.
can be huge for you and your team. I mean,
Especially when
there's
you
a huge
talk about
payoff.
the scarcity at the tight end position.
Yeah,
Every
absolutely.
half of your league is looking for a stable tight end,
Yeah,
and
and I have three.
if you have three of them, shit, man, like you drive up that price easy.
And the thing is too, like one of the things I love doing, like I said, I have three. I think what I did in my big money league is I kept Andrews, I shipped off Evan Ingram, and I shipped off Darren Waller. And in one of those trades, I just got like some mediocre backup in return. So like if Mark Andrews was to get hurt, then I just play Andrews backup. I think I had Hayden Hurst on my bench, and I traded for like Noah Fant or like someone who wasn't doing too well in the rookie year.
Right.
So I had the coverage. So it's never a bad idea to go after upside. We talk about in fantasy football, one of the things you want to do is go for value, and one of the most unseen values in fantasy football is grabbing those high upside tight ends at the end of your draft. I mean, if you spent that extra pick on Mark Andrews last year, it could have won you the championship, whether you traded him or kept him or whatever it was. So that's how I go about tight ends. I like to try to get a top tier, not necessarily a top tier guy, but I like to get one of those good starting tight ends and then pair them up with a high upside guy. And if they both pan out, I'm in a great situation.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. For me, like usually most years, I'm either drafting an elite tight end, like
Mm-hmm.
meaning like a Kelsey or a Kittle, if their value is right.
Yep.
Right. I think last year Kelsey was being drafted a little bit higher than he is this year. Right. Kittle was drafted a little bit lower than he was this year. Right. But for me, like I might not favor those mid tier tight ends like last year. The reason why is they don't really offer much of a positional advantage, right? Like those other guys do, right? And the chances that they kill it isn't like too high. It's not high enough to the point where we can pass up on some running back and wide receiver value, in those middle rounds. Like last year, who were we looking at? We were looking at Evan Ingram, right? And he was coming off an injury plague season, right? Hunter Henry, OJ Howard, David Njoku, right? Like those like the mid round guys that everyone was like,
Yep.
oh, who are you picking? How are you ranking those guys, right? And none of them panned out, right? Henry finished as like a low end tight end one, but he's not offering you any positional advantage, right? And and now like he's being drafted. Is he being drafted lower now as a
Hunter
tight end?
Henry?
Which he's still being drafted as the tight end one right now. Um,
Yeah.
you know. But then, like, you look at the later guys that can break out, and you're paying a lower price, like Austin Hooper, right? Last year, Mark Andrews last year, right? And the Austin Hooper and Mark Andrews of this year, can be like Mike Gesicki and Hayden Hurst,
Yep.
right? And the worst
Hayden
that
Hurst,
comes,
unfortunately, had to pay a little bit of higher
yeah,
price, but
and now that's the case, right? And the worst that comes out of picking a tight end late, or Jonnu Smith,
yep.
right? He's another example, right? And I think the worst that comes out of picking that tight end late, punting the tight end completely and then picking a tight end late, or you just pick up a better one off of waivers, right? Like you're likely going to be just as fine as if you picked one of those tight ends in the middle rounds. I think you have just as likely of a chance to hit without paying that premium, right? Unless you're shooting for the upside for a guy like Evan Ingram, right, where you're shooting for that like top three upside because he has it in him. He just has to stay healthy, right?
Yeah.
So
And
that's kind of how I like to do it. And you know, you grabbing a couple of those guys, between rounds 10 and until the end of your draft might be a good strategy, just so that you're kind of, even though you're in on those guys, like I'm in on Mike Gesicki, even though I'm in on him doesn't mean that he'll hit. Yeah, like with all the stuff that I saw, like I think he'll hit, but at the same time, he might not hit. Right? Same thing with Austin Hooper last year.
yep.
Even though I thought that he was going to hit, maybe he might not have hit. He ended up hitting, but you maybe it's a good idea to just, like you said, just grab that second guy just in case he doesn't hit, or both hit, and you're sitting pretty.
Yeah, you don't want to underestimate the value of having that positional advantage at tight end. I feel like quarterback, obviously, there's a bit of a gap, but you can still, the gap isn't nearly as much if you have if you're looking at a starting roster, you're like, okay, running backs are pretty even, wide receivers, like this guy may have a little better, and then you look at like Travis Kelsey against like would have been last year, like Jason Witten, like a guy who just totally passed on tight ends. You're like, oh shit, like
Right.
he's
Yeah,
gonna
and you have to be careful.
screw me in
Like when
that
you get to the end of
situation.
your draft, like you have to like don't forget to monitor who's left.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Especially
So
at tight end. At QB, you might be able to get away with it, but
mhm.
not at tight end.
Yeah, at tight ends are a lot more valuable than they seem. So another guy who I really like this year, Jared Cook. I have him 10th. I have him a spot above Higby, one spot after Gizicki. So Cook was the tight end two when Breeze returned from his injury. He averaged 15.5 points per game in that span. He had the highest yards per reception among tight ends with a minimum of 40 receptions. That's 16.4. And he's 33 years old. I mean, talk
Yeah.
about a late bloomer. This guy really came alive in Oakland, right? When there were still the Oakland Raiders. He had that big year with Derek Carr. Now, with the Saints, he really picked it up the second half of the year. This guy's 33 years old, and there's no sign of him slowing down at all. So it's a
I know it's crazy. Like he's always teased us though, his whole career.
yeah,
Like he's always had these games where like two games in a row with like 100 yards or like, 80 yards and a touchdown. And then like you put him in your lineup and he's terrible.
yeah,
Um, but he was much more consistent with Derek Carr. And then it just kind of like now he's with Drew Brees, who can take advantage of that talent too. So I'm happy with Jared Cook as my tight end one, like especially at his price in the 10th round, his ADP, like that's pretty good, man.
yeah.
Um,
In the Throne
he
League, I
he,
got
he
him
was
in the
tied with
13-10.
wait, what's that?
In the Throne League, we were able to get him with a 13-10, the end of the 13th round.
Are you serious? Is that a 12 team PPR or a
Yeah,
10?
12 team.
Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah, I know. We couldn't
That's
pass up
legit,
on it.
man. That's legit.
Fell into our
But
lap.
yeah, he tied with Mark Andrews for the lead in end zone targets.
I'm
So, and
sure
the
a lot
reason,
of
by
that
the
came
way,
in the
like if
second
anyone
half
doesn't know
too.
why I keep bringing up end zone targets instead of red zone targets, it's just something that you just have a much likely. It's a much. It's tied to fantasy success a lot more than red zone targets are. So if you're targeted, if you think about it, it just makes sense, right? If you're
Yeah,
targeted and the players are already in the end zone, you have a much higher chance of scoring than if you're 20 yards out and you catch a pass or something.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think Emmanuel Sanders should cut into his share a little bit. Breeze was still looking for him in the end zone, and with tight ends, I think that's what holds a lot of the value anyway.
Yeah. So, and I mean, he could easily be shooting for like 6, 7, 8 touchdowns on the end of the year. I don't
Yeah,
think he's going to have as much as he did last year, but
yeah.
yeah, could definitely be the case. So let's get into this next tier. We got T.J. Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Jonnu Smith, Dallas Goddard. There's probably some names missing that people are hearing if they're watching this. Like, where's Gronk? Where's Austin Hooper? But we're gonna get to those guys. We're gonna get to those guys right after we talk about some of these guys. So between T.J. Hawkinson and Noah Fant, who would you rather have on your team? I think I have my answer here, but what's your answer? I'm curious.
Um, it's a
And don't
good
say
question.
neither. Don't say neither,
I was
'cause
gonna say
that's no
neither.
fun.
Sorry, so I
That's
guess I can't say neither. I think I would go Hawkinson.
yeah,
And the only reason why I would go Hawkinson is because I think there's less competition for targets in Detroit, and like Matt Stafford was like averaging like 350 pass yards per game last year before he got hurt. Marvin Jones, it's basically Marvin Jones, Kenny Galladay, and Hawkinson. And Hawkinson, he looked good in his rookie year, and not many tight ends do. He ran a lot of routes, so I'm fine with taking Hawkinson. But the thing with Noah Fant is I think there's more competition for targets for him, and I think that's the only issue that I have. I mean, they have KJ Hamler, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Melvin Gordon now, who's going to be getting a higher share of targets. So it's going to be a little bit tougher for him to do his thing, I think. If you're projecting Drew Lock to take a jump from year one to year two, you would expect some good things out of Noah Fant because he's talented. I mean, he showed a lot of promise. His rookie year was really good for a tight end. But when I look at opportunity, I think Hawkinson might have a little bit more of it next year.
yeah. So Hawkinson, he was on pace for 79 targets as a rookie, which it's not bad at all. And I mean, with the second year jump, and he wasn't, he started play. He was with his snaps. It was hit or miss. Sometimes he'd be in snaps like 79. Sometimes he'd be in the 40, 50s because they had
Right.
Jesse James, who a lot of people forget about. who they took before they drafted Hawkinson. So, but Hawkins is a really good run blocker, which is he's going to be on the field a lot because they still have Daryl Bevel and they still want to be a running team. They drafted DeAndre Swift, so Hawkins is going to be on the field a lot, especially with the second year jump. We talked about 79 targets last year. Damian Amendola, I think, if anything, I think he took like a pay cut to stay with the team. He was a free agent and he came back for less money, even after a mildly productive year. Marvin Jones getting up there in age. Kenny Golladay is still going to be the go-to guy, but T.J. Hawkinson could really own that short to intermediate role, especially with like we talk about like those run blocking, right? If he's lining up in the slot, in like to where they could change from a running play to a passing play or to do a play action, he's in a perfect spot to be the benefactor of a lot of those plays. So there's definitely a lot of design plays you could do with TJ Hawkinson. He was taken in the top 10. And yeah, I mean, he's going to be in the field. Matt Stafford had 19 touchdowns, passing touchdowns in 8 games last year. And he's going to be healthy going into this year as well. So there's a lot of opportunity even in a supposed run heavy offense. So I'm all on Hawkinson as one of those later round guys. I don't think he's got quite the upside of we talked about before, like a Gazicki or like I mean obviously Higbee's upside we know was like gone, like through the roof. But yeah, I mean I'd still target T.J. Hawkinson as one of those later round guys as opposed to Noah Fant. Like you said, he had some flashes last year with Locke. He needs a lot to go right. He's not going to be a volume guy, and he had the second highest yards per reception, right behind Jared Cook, with 40 plus catches. First round talent, but a lot of weapons. It's not going to help him get that volume. So if he's on the field more, and we'll talk about Fant now. If he's on the field more, and if he sees the right targets, then he could still be a week to week guy. But I'm a little hesitant on Fant more so than I am with Hawkinson.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, we're in agreement.
Yeah, I think so, man. I think there's going to be a lot, and also it's like, who are you trusting more, right? Are you trusting
Yep.
Drew Lock? Are you trusting Matt Stafford?
Yep.
And I think Stafford, going into his second year, we know that he likes to throw those short to intermediate passes because he's done it with Golden Tate for such a long time. But he's not had that for a couple of years now. Danny Amendola did it a couple of games last year. But what I'm saying, Hawkinson is that first round talent, right? He's that guy who's going to get it, who they drafted for that reason.
Yep.
So I think he's going to be shoved into that role sooner than later.
Absolutely. And let's get into these other two guys in the top 15. Jonnu Smith, I had 14th. Borderline tight end 1 last year when he was with Tannehill. He had the second highest yards per target, and that came from a fantasy football expert on Instagram. So he made a long, in-depth thing about Jonnu Smith, so I just want to throw him some credit for that. But second highest yards per target among tight ends with 9.8. He's great after the catch. He's got the starting role to himself. They did not re-sign Delaney Walker. They didn't sign any other tight ends. It's really just him and AJ Brown. I mean, Corey Davis, Adam Humphries, slightly involved, but I think Jonnu Smith is going to get the nod as the second, the second guy up in that offense. So if AJ Brown's covered, if they're running hard with Derrick Henry, Jonnu Smith is going to be the guy open, and he's a great tight end. He's a great receiver. So it's going to be interesting to see him get more opportunity. What do you got on Jonnu Smith?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think Jonnu Smith is in a good spot, without Delaney Walker. Obviously this is a run heavy offense, right? But he's probably going to be the second target regardless. I don't think Corey Davis is going to be that guy. You know what I mean? I don't think they have a guy who's going
Fortunately.
to. Yeah, I know, man. We were hard body Corey Davis truthers, both of us.
Yeah.
I remember there was like weeks in a row we were just like, guys, trade for Corey Davis right now.
This is it.
Like,
It's
right,
going to happen this week.
We're like, not everybody gets a target share like Corey Davis. So when guys like that get target share, you gotta trade for him. Everyone's like, all right, cool, I traded for him. Hey, should I trade this guy for Corey Davis? Yes. Should I trade this guy for Corey Davis? Yeah, do it.
He had that big game against the Chargers. We're like, it's happening. It's happening. Tannehill's the one.
And like, oh no, it was the game against the Eagles, right, where he caught that game-winning touchdown, right? Anyway, all right. So I digress. But yeah, no, I think I think they're in a good spot. he's in a good spot to make a jump, and he's a perfect late round tight end. He has the talent. He showed flashes, and the other tight end that was on the team, not on the team anymore. So,
Yep.
a lot of things working in his favor.
And you know, Deion Lewis, right? He's a guy not a lot of people are talking about. He left and he leaves some targets on the table. Those aren't going to go to Derrick Henry. And then you talk about probably seeing a target decrease from Corey Davis, seeing a target decrease from Adam Humphries. Where else is he going to go with the ball? Even like let's say even if this is a rush heavy team, I don't think any team had less than like 400 whatever passing attempts. And all of that's not going to go to AJ Brown. Even with the most run heavy teams there are, the ball is still going to have to go somewhere. I mean, I have it right here in front of me. I think the Ravens. So the Ravens threw the ball 440 times last year, and they ran the ball 596. So even at the bare minimum, like that's probably the lowest we're looking at here. I mean, you look at the Titans. Let's see if I can scroll down here real quick. The Titans threw the ball 448 times, so they weren't too far off. But yeah, there's just nowhere else for the targets to go, to be honest. I mean, Corey Davis seems like the next guy up. It's not going to go to Darrington Evans. He doesn't have that Deion Lewis role. I don't know. It's just, I don't want to see the argument of the fact that they're just a run heavy offense, so no one can be beneficial, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look at George Kittle, right? Like he's in
Yep.
a run heavy offense. They had
Debo and Emmanuel
Debo, and
Sanders last year.
he was going to be fine this year. He was going to take a second year jump, right?
Yep.
That was obvious. But and it could happen, right? And offenses kind of, unless you're like Brian Schottenheimer, offenses do evolve, depending on what kind of personnel you have.
Absolutely. So
Sorry, I had to throw a little shot at Brian Schottenheimer.
that fucking guy. Oh, I said a curse word. I don't know if I can put this on YouTube now.
Oh, I cursed already.
Oh, you
Before
did?
this. So yep,
Nah.
a couple times.
All right. Well, I'm not making money anyway.
No,
So
you
that's
can.
fine.
Right, you you can go on YouTube. They just won't monetize you. It's not like you can't make the 10 cents that you were gonna make. Sorry, bro.
Damn. I want to go to the dollar store tomorrow. So next up is Dallas Goddard. He's my 15th ranked tight end. I have him above Austin Hooper, above Rob Gronkowski. He had the ninth most targets, and that was as a backup, right? We'll call him a backup, but it's
Right.
really two starting tight ends for the Eagles. And I think that could be even more true this year with Zach Ertz in the slot. Say they're running 12 personnel. All their guys are deep guys, so they don't have to worry about anybody playing in the slot. You have Deshaun Jackson on the outside, maybe Jalen Rager on the other side, Marquise Goodwin filtering in, whatever. Alshon Jeffrey, nowhere to be seen, but he's still also an outside guy. So, I mean, Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz both lining up in the slot. They could both succeed. And, I mean, if you look at Dallas Goedert and what he was able to do last year, and like I said, again, a backup tight end, right? So Dallas Goedert, let's see, he had 607 yards, which is a lot more than any other starting tight end. A lot of other tight ends. He had 87 targets, 58 catches, 5 touchdowns, and then you look at his week to week. I mean, he was pretty average, right? He averaged on the year, he was 9.6. He was really close to that 10 mark. And like I said, the same thing with Ertz. These guys are just opening up the middle more and more. And regardless of the fact that he got sucker punched and a potential concussion from that, which was crazy, by the way. I don't know. Did they ever find out a story about why that guy felt the need to just punch Dallas Goddard
Dude,
unconscious?
no, we have no idea. I would love to
What
find
is the
out.
point of that? Does he know him? I wish there was some kind of context to that. It's not our business, but like we still I'm so curious about that.
Oh, it's
But
it's so our business. It's not even funny.
if I'm going to be drafting him, I need to know who his enemies are. But what do you got on Dallas Goddard?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that you'll probably end up getting on the waiver wire at some point,
Yep.
right? Somebody is going to drop him, and you're going to say like, all right, well, I'll pick him up because I need a streamer this week. This team is weak against tight ends, so I'm going to grab him. I think that he might not provide enough upside on a weekly basis to the point where like he might not be somebody's weekly tight end. But I think his upside is through the roof if Zach Ertz ever were to go down,
Yeah, that's another
because
thing
he
too.
has all the tools of a tight end that you need. end zone target, and his depth of target, can increase heavily if Zach Ertz were to go down because he'll be running all different types of routes. Because with Ertz on the field, they can kind of coordinate how they want to use both of those guys. So, yeah, I like Goddard a lot as a talent. It's just that the opportunity, you know, might not be amazing like those other guys, and that's why he's ranked as you know, a low end. Well, what do you have him ranked at 15? You said,
15, like
yeah,
a high tight
yeah.
end
So I
to
think
mid
I
range.
think he can crack. He has a good shot at cracking the top 12, if he's used the same way. And they are devoid of targets there in Philadelphia. So with Carson Wentz coming back and being a year healthier, I think he'll be fine. But he's not someone you necessarily need to draft though.
Yeah, we talked about upside later on, guys. Dallas Goedert's more of that plug and play if need be, like a bye week fill type guy. He's not one of those. He'll put him in. He can get like 20 plus points that week. I don't think he had a single game over 20 points last year,
Right.
but he is a guy who can. There's a good chance he can get you that 10 plus points to get you by in the week. So, not one of those high upside guys unless Ertz is hurt. Like if you have a big bench and you want to grab him and hold him there, if Ertz God forbid something happens to Ertz, you have a
He
tight end one on your team.
Yeah, I said it last year before the season started that if there's any like tight end who is like a handcuff to a already
Mhm.
great tight end, it's Dallas Goedert to Zach Ertz.
Yeah, and we talked about taking three tight ends. If you're going to do Zach Ertz, Dallas Goddard, and maybe Jonnu Smith, you're in a really good spot because
Right.
you have that tight end one secured. You could throw Jonnu in that flex or in that bye week fill in. So you're in a really good spot. Trade bait, whatever it might be. And there is that point where obviously you get past that bye week. You can trade a guy like Jonnu Smith and just keep Ertz and Goddard as your only two tight ends because if Ertz get hurt, you're going to throw the other guy in. So that's a good thing to do with handcuffs as well. So
Did you say if Ertz gets hurts? Is that
if
what you said?
Ertz gets hurts, yeah, if Ertz gets hurts,
I just
throw
wanted
the.
to
If
just double
Ertz gets
check.
hurts, put in the Goddards.
Oh, I kind of like that. Kind of. I like
You
mine better,
guys,
but
if you guys heard that and you like it, dislike the video, just so I know.
oh man,
Gonna get a lot of dislikes.
this
Okay,
is just
so
going downhill.
it's going downhill. And talk about going downhill, Austin Hooper. So Austin Hooper. Oh shit.
Yes.
Okay, so Austin Hooper. Obviously, right now there's a lot of stuff going on with David Njoku. They said that he says he wants to be traded, but the Browns are insistent on him staying on the team. If he does get traded, Austin Hooper is going to be a lot higher for me because I do believe Njoku is a huge, huge threat to Hooper. Right? I mean, first round talent. I think like in a vacuum, right? If they were both given the same opportunity and they were both healthy, I think Njoku would do better, right? As a player and as an athlete, I
Right.
personally think Njoku is the better player. And we talked about before Austin Hooper potentially being a product of that system with Atlanta, with Matt Ryan being good and having Dirk Cutter as their offensive coordinator. It got him paid, but he may not perform up to that level. So he's going to be splitting the work with David Njoku. And he's not going to see nearly as many targets. I mean, what priority is he going to be? So let's say best case, he's behind OBJ and behind Landry. Best case, he's the third priority target for Baker Mayfield on an offense that wants to be run heavy with Kevin Stefanski, and he's going to be splitting that third priority with a guy like David Njoku, who, as I said before, in a vacuum, given both the same opportunity, I truly believe David Njoku is the better player. So for me, I'm so heavily avoiding Austin Hooper. I really hope this David Njoku talk doesn't put his ADP any higher than it already is, because like we talked about, there's so many other guys you can go after that are a lot safer. I'm just staying so far away from Austin Hooper this season.
Yeah, and you look at Kevin Stefanski going over there. This could basically be a Kyle Rudolph, Irv Smith situation,
Yeah,
and which is neither, like, you don't want either guy, right? I mean, unless one goes down, then the other guy becomes a lot more relevant. But he could. So you have OBJ one this year, Jarvis Landry two this year. That's what I think. But
potentially Kareem Hunt
I
as a
think Kareem
three, which
Hunt,
we're not.
Kareem Hunt number three. And then number 4 and 5 is between probably Njoku and Austin Hooper. So there's a chance that Austin Hooper is the fifth guy on the totem pole, potentially.
In a
Obviously,
run-heavy
more
offense
likely
with
it'll likely
Baker
be.
Mayfield.
And yeah, it's not. And on top of that, run heavy offense with Kevin Stefanski, right?
Yep.
And you're like, why did they even trade for Austin Hooper? And
Or
it
sign him
looks.
rather.
I'm sorry. Why did they grab Austin Hooper? And it could be stupid at first glance, but and even if you look at it again, it might be dumb. But like, the Vikings did the same
I
shit
just looked at it again.
Ste-
It's still dumb.
after Kevin Stefanski took over in Minnesota. The
Uh-huh.
Vikings did the same thing. They re-signed Kyle Rudolph to a massive extension, right? And they didn't have fantasy numbers to go with it, right? It doesn't mean that he needs fantasy numbers to like live up to a contract from a team's overall perspective of success. But Irv Smith was still there and is a great young talent and prospect, right? So like them locking up Kyle Rudolph was like kind of a little head scratching. But if you look at it deeply,
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Stefanski ran more two tight end sets than any other coach last season, right? And it just sucks that a coach's philosophy depends so much on this to make them spend that much money on a second tight end because he has a stupid contract, right?
Yeah.
When you have David Njoku, on his rookie deal, and you can spend that money elsewhere, right? You know what I mean? So anyway, that's more of a football perspective, but I'm not interested in Hooper, nor am I paying up. Even if he's at a value, like I don't really care. Baker didn't even keep Njoku relevant in the limited opportunity he had with him. And then Stefanski obviously didn't have either Rudolph or Irv Smith as fantasy relevant contributors last year. And anyway, but it's going to be interesting though because it's going to be a run heavy offense, right? They had Diggs and Thielen to throw to last year. Neither, was happy, obviously, or we weren't happy with their volume when they
Yep.
both were on the field, and now they have OBJ and Landry, right? So it's going to be interesting. A lot of parallels.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy to think, and at the same time, I'd be interested to see Austin Hooper's success as a pass or run blocker, right? Because I mean, if you look at why they would want a guy like Austin Hooper, if he's really good at something, like, and I haven't looked into this myself, I was just thinking about it now. I don't even want to look into him because I'm just not interested in him. But if he is a good run blocker, and when you talk about a big part of their philosophy is running heavy on the ground, then we could see him being used more in that role. And I don't think he really necessarily has the end zone work locked down. So it's just not a pretty situation for Austin Hooper. And it's also not a pretty situation for Rob Gronkowski. So Rob Gronkowski took a whole year off, came back. He wasn't even great in his last year in the NFL. He wasn't even a week-to-week starter at that point. He'll be fighting for He'll be fighting for snaps in an offense that's not favorable for tight ends, as we saw with OJ Howard, blatantly busted and disappointed so many people last year. He'll be splitting, and we talked about being third or fourth priority target with a guy like with Austin Hooper. Rob Gronkowski is going to be in the same situation. He's going to be fighting for that third, fourth priority target. I mean, does Brady like his tight ends? Not necessarily. Brady likes Gronk, right? Brady likes good, talented tight ends. And when he has, and he didn't have any weapons too. So I went back in this a while ago when Brady first got signed to the Bucs. Everybody was really overhyping OJ Howard, but at the same time, when Brady had Randy Moss and Wes Welker on the field, their starting tight end was Benjamin Watson, who I guess at that point who wasn't fantastic, wasn't elite, but he was a good tight end, and he wasn't fantasy relevant at all. So if you have those receivers on the field, Brady's not going to look for Gronk every single play. He may not be in the field every single play, and at best, if he's his red zone guy, you're going to need more points than that. You're going to need some yardage. Let's say if Gronk gets a touchdown every single game the whole entire year, that's like what, like 7.1 points if you're in a PPR league. It's got to be at least a yard. You got to get 1 point for the catch, 6 points for the touchdowns. That's like 7 points a game. You're hoping he catches two. You're taking this guy in the first 10 rounds, and you're hoping and you're betting on the fact that with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, OJ Howard, and Cameron Brate, I don't want to discount Cameron Brate
You
either.
can't.
You can because Cameron Brate is great in the red zone too. So you're betting on Gronk having at least two touchdowns every game. And even if he does, even let's say Gronk scores two touchdowns the whole entire year, every single game. That's like what, 14 points? That's not even as good as Travis Kelsey or that's not good as Travis Kelce's George Kittle, and obviously our expectations aren't that high. But even at his best, he's not anywhere close to that. So, and I don't think he can get anywhere close to that. I'm avoiding Gronk at all counts. I don't even know where his ADP is. Like I said, I didn't look too much at these guys because I don't like.
Gronk's ADP is the bottom of the sixth round. Yeah, yeah.
Why? Why?
I don't
Why?
know, man. He's Gronk, dude. Like he's just
Why?
always going to be overhyped. I mean, not always. He was never overhyped when he was actually good. There were seasons where you can get him at a slight discount and he was still elite, but he's not elite anymore. And when you have like I think you nailed it when you said that when you have elite weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, then you're not really forced to pass it to your guy. You know what I mean? Like it's nice having Gronk in the locker room with Brady because he's their close friends and all that, but I don't think it's going to translate. Like if I'm a quarterback, who would I rather throw to anyway? OJ Howard right now or or Gronk? OJ Howard. You know what I mean? Like it's not much of a thought, right? And you didn't mention Keyshawn Vaughn. Like if he develops into that like that
James White.
passing down role, that James White guy, then like he has another guy that he likes to throw to, right? Or
Or
another type of
discount the
guy he
fact
likes to
that
throw
they
to.
can sign Devontae Freeman, or if Tyler Johnson. I don't know. I'm just trying
Listen,
to.
man, I'm a big Tyler Johnson guy. Like the fact that they drafted him in the fifth round. Now they said that they want to go into 12 personnel most of the time this year, and I understand that. But if Tyler Johnson can like show some things, like if there is going to be a training camp, I think they can start running 11 personnel again, three wide receivers, and throw him into the slot, and then throw Godwin outside. I
Yeah,
think that's possible. And then when you're going into 11 personnel and you have to choose one tight end to stay on the field, is it going to be Gronk? I don't know.
I don't know. I'd be interested to see where Gronk is as a blocker at this point in his career too,
Right.
because
He
if
was
he's
always a
being
elite blocker,
no,
right?
yeah, I was obviously a
But
great
now,
lead
I don't
blocker.
know.
Yep. And I mean, obviously, if you're putting him in as a blocker every single play, that's just his injury risk is going up and up and up and up and up. And
I
who
don't know if
knows?
he came in. I don't know if he came back to the league to be a blocker.
Yeah, I don't think he came. I personally, I think he's just there for a ride, there for the ride.
Right.
He
He's
just,
he's just excited. He's like, I want
yeah,
to win the Super Bowl with my
he's
boy.
like, oh, party in Florida, maybe win another Super Bowl. Why not? Play a small role, whatever it has to be. Catch a few
Right.
touchdowns here and there, do some
Right.
Gronk spikes for the crowd, whatever it
Right.
is. But
He,
I
he wants
realistically,
to add to his legacy a little bit, I think.
yeah, there you go. And if you look at like just simply put, the way he finished his last season, I don't see any way for him to improve from that point in
Right.
this situation. It may look better, but it's really not. I mean, it's so much more crowded. Like it's better fantasy for like Chris Godwin, whatever. But like it's not better for Gronk. It's not a good situation for him to be in. Yeah, I'm avoiding Gronk. So
I'm with you.
yeah, I that wraps it up. I'll mention we won't go into them. I'll mention like a couple other guys who you might want to target. Like Chris Herndon.
Yep.
I
He's
think we're
one guy.
both pretty good fans of Chris Herndon. He could potentially be the number one guy on that team. So,
Yep.
and obviously he disappointed some people last year, but he was hit with suspension, injury. So, hopefully he can do a little better this year. Chris Herndon, someone I'm looking at. We talked about Gerald Everett before. He could be a better value if you're in a deeper league than a guy like Tyler Higbee. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of it.
I want to mention Jack Doyle,
Jack
right?
Doyle,
With
not bad.
with Eric Ebron leaving, right,
Yep.
and Philip Rivers coming in, we know that Philip Rivers, like he's had great tight ends during his career. But when we've seen certain, his great tight ends go down to injury, he's had other tight ends kind of fill in to the point where like they became fantasy relevant. So that's something to look into with Jack Doyle. He's not going to wow you, right? He's not like the craziest athlete in the world, but he could be very relevant in PPR leagues, and we've seen it before with Andrew Luck. And since he's like the main guy, without without Ebron there, he could see a high snap percentage and a lot of routes run. So with Philip Rivers there, I think he could be relevant.
And if healthy, I'd want to put Will Disley on that list if he's healthy, right?
Right.
Even with Greg Olson being there, we saw Jacob Hollister came in and he was a top 10 tight end for a lot of weeks as well. So it'll be interesting to see how the tight end position shakes out this year. But thank you for joining me again, Faraz.
Sure,
This
man.
is the end of uh, our positional rankings and talks. So we're gonna have to figure out something else for next
No,
time.
no, no. We're not done yet. We're not
We're
done yet.
not
We're not done yet. And I'm
kickers.
gonna say it on the
Kickers.
podcast to put pressure on you.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk. We're gonna continue the running back talk, and we're gonna continue. How many
Wide
wide
receivers.
receivers did you guys go through last week?
15,
Okay, well, there are a lot
15,
of wide
16,
receivers to
17.
talk about, so I'm willing to talk about wide receivers. If Rapper doesn't want to come through, um, no problem. I'm with it.
So you're saying part two for
Part
each,
two, part two of running backs, wide receivers, whatever. I'm down.
and maybe we'll split a tight end quarterback into part two.
I guess if there's any other titles to talk about,
I mean, I like kickers, but
let's have a whole episode on kickers.
yes, I'd
Let's do
love
it.
that.
It's all 30, breaking down all 32 NFL kickers.
So it's great journaling. He's got a good accuracy. I like the way. All right, well, that's enough of us mumbling. Thank you guys, and you heard from Faraz. We're gonna work on doing we'll do running backs next week.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's do
Yeah.
it.
So running backs part two. If you guys like part one, we're going to come back with part two next week. So stay tuned for that. Thank you again for joining me. If you guys aren't following us, I'm going to put all our links in the description. If you're listening to the podcast, follow me on Instagram, fantasy.football.analyst. Follow Faraz, Upper Hand Fantasy. And you want to say anything to sign us off here?
No, man. I think everyone just stay safe. Everyone stay good, and thank you for listening. That's
Wear a
it.
mask.
If you made it this far,
Wear a mask if you made it this far.
wear a mask, guys.
Wear a mask. All right. Thanks, guys. See you.